the villain with no name. This all started when I was around 7 years old. I don't remember how exactly I met him, but I always remembered him following me around. He followed me to school and on vacation. Basically, everywhere I went he was with me. He was also always up to no good, always causing trouble as if he enjoyed other people's inconveniences. For example, once we were at the market, and there was a pregnant lady nearby who was reaching to a higher shelf to grab one of the tinned foods. He noticed she was struggling and made all the items on the shelf fall down. The worst part is, no one can see him but me. As a child, I never thought he was a demon. I thought of him as a friend, because he was always with me. I was never able to see this friend of mine, since he was always standing in the shadows wherever we went. Other than the horns that twisted from his head and his sharp talons, I couldn't see him. Yet I always knew he was around me, like I could sense his presence ever since I started seeing him. As a child, I called him Villain because of the mischief he caused. He never told me his name, so I named him Villain with no name, which I later shortened to just Villain. Villain became more violent and cruel as time went on. From making people experience almost harmless inconveniences, he went to locking the neighbors' children in our basement, which was his safe place when he got scared. My parents never went down to the basement, so he decided it would be a homey place to nest, or so he told me. I asked him why he brought the children to the basement. I get lonely down there sometimes. I just want company, and those kids are the kindest people around here. Villain replied in his demonic, deep voice, "But why don't you just take me down there? I can keep you company. We can even play hide and seek or tag." "Oh dear, you aren't allowed down there. If your parents find out you've been going in the basement, they wouldn't let us play anymore." "Why?" "I don't know, that's just what they said." So, after that, I never inquired him about the basement again. Not until I started hearing screaming from there. My parents weren't in a good place financially throughout my childhood, and could barely afford my school fees and our regular provisions, so we lived in a rented one-story house. The basement door was at the end of a short hall, and my bedroom was beside it a little further down. Every night after Villain started bringing kids into the basement, I heard children screaming, groaning and scratching from the basement door, which meant I never slept well enough. "Villain, why are the children always screaming and crying in the basement?" "They are just having fun. We play games because it's easy to get bored down there." "Why do they cry though?" "Michael always falls down when we play hide and seek, that's all." I believed Villain. I mean, he had no reason to lie to me. I never slept well. Sometimes I didn't sleep at all. There was always screaming and crying every night, especially when Villain brought more children into the basement. Every night, after screaming for a long time, the children would stop. Everything would become silent. Villain would come back after the yelling stopped. "They're asleep," he said every night, only to bring more the next morning. The police were always in our neighborhood, trying to assist all the parents who reported their children as missing night after night. At the time, I didn't piece that it was Villain who was keeping the kids, nor did I know the weight of the situation and disregarded it as a mere coincidence. I lived with Villain my whole childhood, but the longer he was around, the more I grew scared of him. He caused even worse problems for others and started coming out of the basement with his talons dripping with blood. I never questioned him. In fact, I barely fancied speaking to him. He realized it and asked me several times, "Why are you not speaking to me?" "I am," I said defensively. Silence. "I'm just tired, nothing else." "Is someone bothering you at school?" "What?" "No, everything's fine." "Tell me if someone does, I'll deal with them." His sentence made my heart drop. I almost questioned him on how he was planning to deal with someone bullying me at school, but stopped myself in fear of what he might respond with. Years passed, and I got used to Villain being around. Not the crying, though. I could never get used to the crying and blood-curdling screaming. One night, I came home from school late, as I had been working on a science project with my friends. I drove up to my house, only to see blue and red sirens flashing. There were police cars parked in front of my house. I jumped out of my car and ran inside, hoping what I thought had happened didn't. I saw my dad, handcuffed and being led out with the police. My mother's face was pale, and there was a look of fear on her face. "What happened, Mom?" I said, panicking. "The basement." "What about it?" "You should see for yourself." Reluctantly, I walked to the basement. A police standing in front of the door followed me in. I froze. I will never forget what I saw that day. The room was drenched with blood. On the walls, the floor, and even the ceiling had splatters on it. In a far corner, there was a pile of children's bodies laying on the ground, holes carved in their stomach, and many of them had been decapitated. The walls had scratches and bloody handprints dragged across it. I couldn't believe it. Villain had done this, yet my dad was the one getting arrested. Such a shame. You never truly know the demon in someone. I'm sorry, I know you never thought of your dad like this before. Villain said from behind me, patting me on the shoulder. It was you. I began, half petrified with terror. Don't be delusional. It was you. You were the only one who came down to the basement. You said you were playing with them, not eating them. You're being silly. Of course I played with them. I guess your dad just got his hands on them first. My dad didn't do anything. Don't worry, no one expects either parent to do this. Hey, at least he didn't do anything to you. I stared at him in disbelief. Was he hinting something? I didn't inquire any more, in fear of my life. I moved out a year later with my mom. We needed a fresh start, and I needed to get away from Villain, yet I didn't dare mention it to her. I ran off without telling Villain, fearful that he would follow. The last time I saw him was when I drove off, far away from my troubles and from the years of torment I endured. He stood at the window of my room, waving, still hiding in the shadows, but his blood-covered talons visible. I didn't wave back. I live with my mum now, and I'm 18 years old. My dad's still in jail, paying for the crimes that he didn't commit. I thought that moving out would be better for me and my mom, to leave the horrifying contents of that house behind, but I was wrong. Villain never left my side. I still feel him lurking around, his presence tracing after me. Just he doesn't say anything now and I can't see him anymore. What's worse is that every night I hear the scratching, distressed yelling and crying. It's always there. The sounds ever stop until sunrise. Every night I have the same nightmare of the basement, and Villain luring those children into it in the dead of night. Nightly predictions. It started a while after my oldest sister's best friend died. I was really close with her. She was like another sister to me, and her parents often went out to eat with mine. We'll call my sister's friend Blair. Blair's funeral was a vivid memory for me. It was the first time I'd been to a funeral of someone so close to me, and seeing her lifeless body in the coffin traumatized me as a child. After that, it felt like I was going to die soon as well. Life felt shorter and more painful. Around a week after attending Blair's funeral, I started to have strange nightmares. In one I was walking around my house, except it was drenched in blood and illuminated with a deep, red light. I could feel the cold blood on my hands and smell the putrid stench. The experience didn't scare me as much as it confused me. How could I smell the blood? How could I feel it? I asked my parents about it, and they didn't understand much either. I concluded it was a lucid dream, even though deep down I knew that wasn't it. The next nightmare scared me a lot more. In it, I was lying in a dark river in what seemed like a cave of some sort with stalactites hanging from above. My hands and feet were tied together tightly, and I could feel the agonizing burning of the rough texture cutting into my flesh. However, the most horrifying thing, I was surrounded by floating corpses. I woke up in the middle of the night after having this outrageous nightmare and ran to my parents' room. They still shook their head and said that it was probably nothing. After that, everything felt wrong. It felt as though I was reaching the light at the end of the tunnel. I can't explain the feeling in any other way. And the nightmares didn't stop there. They came night after night, each one more petrifying than the last. The last one I had, however, was the worst. I was walking around my house in the middle of the night. First to my two sisters' shared room. I stood at the entrance, staring at them for a while, before pulling out a gun. I was shaken, even though I was dreaming. Before anything else could happen, I shot them. I did the same to every member of my family, watching them experience a silent, excruciating death. I jolted awake in a pool of cold sweat. Tears started rolling down my face. I didn't understand why any of this would happen to me. That same day, everything in my body hurt for some reason, and I would flinch at the quietest sound. I lost the will to live. I wanted all of this to end. My parents made me sleep with my older sister, The next night, because I couldn't sleep on my own without getting scared. The next night, I woke up in the middle of the night, not because of a nightmare though. I heard a sound from across the hall. I looked over to my sister, who was also awake. Without speaking, we both slowly got up and peeked through the ajar door of my room. I saw a dark silhouette enter my two younger sisters' room across the hall from mine. Then, bang, my heart dropped. No way, I thought to myself. No way. Then again, another loud shot. The figure stepped out, dragging two bodies into the hall. I looked at its face. It was Blair's mother. My heart, originally thumping and colliding with my chest, stopped. The floor was drenched with blood, and the revolting stench made me retch. My sister pulled me back, in fear that she might see us. I was numb, couldn't feel anything but horrified. This just had to be another dream. Yet I didn't stop staring, my eyes following her every movement. She then moved into my younger brother's room, coming out dragging another small body. My parents came rushing upstairs after hearing the first two shots. Another two deafening shots left their lifeless bodies falling to the ground. She jolted her head in our direction. I didn't care to move, to hide in the shadows. She stared at me. My family was ruined. I couldn't stand to see you all living my previous perfect life. Why, you understand, right? The words echoed for a while in the silence of the night. After a moment, she looked at her gun. Back at us. Back at the gun. I didn't care to run, to jump out of the window. She looked back at me one last time, before pointing the gun at her forehead and pulling the trigger in one sharp, sudden movement. After the incident, my sister and I called the police. It was found that Blair's mother had killed two other families, both families of Blair's friends. Their bodies were found floating in a river near our house. I had predicted it. My dreams had shown me what would happen. Now it all made sense. I felt helpless. Everything lost its meaning. I lost a reason to live after that. They were all gone. The people who had constructed my life were gone. The pain was so bad that I couldn't even cry. It has been 15 years since that incident. I lead a stable life, good career, but I'm still alone. I can't stand having close relationships with people anymore, let alone live with them. I live in fear of everything now. Sometimes I wish that Blair's mom would have shot me first. At least then someone would do something useful with their life. I will forever be haunted with the memories of that month 15 years ago. Forever. A quiet kid. Max sauntered down the hallway with his group of friends, all laughing and teasing the vulnerable students as they passed. Other students slammed their lockers shut, shaking their heads at the boisterous group of careless boys. Max, Brad, Sean and Kyle, the bullies of freshman year, also known to be a part of the popular clique. Almost everyone in school who wasn't considered popular dreaded being noticed by the group. The rest couldn't care less about them. After all, they were just a bunch of hateful, crude teenagers. The bell rang again. Everyone strolled back to their classes, hauling piles of books. Max entered his classroom, slammed his books on his table, and threw his bag on the ground next to his table. He looked around. Realizing that the teacher wasn't in class yet, he took the chance to pick on the antsy students in the room. A particular boy with freckles and caramel brown hair, Percy, was a regular target for Max and his pack of wolves. By far the most vulnerable, isolated, and mostly silent child in the whole school. Max crept behind Percy and yanked on his hair, causing him to flinch and swiftly turn around. There was a look of anger on his face and his hand formed into fists. Max was slightly taken aback. Percy had never reacted like this. For the most, he ignored Max, even when he started getting physically hurt. Today, however, was different. "What?" he asked, annoyed. "Easy. Someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed today," Max said with a chuckle. "What do you want, Max?" Percy repeated, his voice now having a progressively threatening tone. Max smirked back. "Watch what you say, buddy." With that, Percy lashed out and started violently attacking Max, having enough of the constant teasing and physical abuse. The two boys kicked and choked each other and didn't stop. The other students stood up and backed off to the front of the class, others pulling out their cameras and recording the dramatic scene. Then their teacher, Mr. Walker, entered. Boys, he hissed, rushing over to separate the hostile pair fighting in the middle of the class. "I'll kill you, Max. You and your stupid inner circle. I'll end you all for what you've done and kept doing. You lifeless idiots, Percy yelled out in a demonic, frustrated voice. A day later, everyone was in their first period, still groggy from insufficient sleep the last night, and their dark eyes fighting to stay open. Then, an announcement came on from the dean. Good morning, students. We have received some unsettling news today. Unfortunately, a fellow student, Percy Stevenson, has committed suicide early this morning. We ask that you all keep him and his family in your thoughts today. The prefects have made a mini memorial for him by his locker, and it would be very much appreciated if you write a note and put it up in honor of him. Thank you and have a good rest of your day. Max's heart sank. He still attempted to maintain the aloof expression on his face, though. Had he done this? It couldn't be. He heard his group of friends softly giggling. Poor child, couldn't handle a simple joke and killed himself instead. One of them said. Max faked a laugh, afraid of being judged by his friends. They were right, it was just a stupid child who was too sensitive to handle minor teasing. The children proceeded to go through the rest of the day, keeping poor Percy in their thoughts as they were requested to. Later that night, Max lay on his bed, messaging his friends. So that kid Percy, he's an idiot, right? Who kills themselves after being picked on? Kyle typed. Lol, exactly, what a loser. Sean replied. Haha, he must have had a sad life, I guess. Brad followed. Max thought on what to send, trying not to seem suspicious of holding any guilt or confusion. Percy was just a loser with a sad life. He thought those threats were going to scare us. What a joke. Wherever he is now, I hope he'll burn in hell, he typed after a while. The boys continued taking bad about Percy and the other nerds in the school before deciding it was late and that they should sleep, considering they had football practice early tomorrow as well. Classic high school jock life, some students said. Later that night, Max awoke in the middle of the night. He looked around, scanning his dim surroundings, sensing something was unusual. He peered over at the alarm clock on his bedside table. 2:59 am. He continued to examine the room for anything that was out of its place. Then something caught his eye. In the far corner of his huge room, someone sat in the corner, with their legs spread out in front of them. Max gasped and sat up. He rubbed his eyes, assuming that he was imagining things. But the figure stayed there, head cocked to one side. Who are you? What do you want? Max said, trying to gain more confidence in his voice, in hopes to intimidate the figure. Oh, you forgot me so soon, said the figure, amused. That voice was familiar. Hello, can you speak? Sure enough, it was Percy's voice. No way, what the hell, Percy? Ah, so you didn't forget me. Well, surprise I guess. His voice now turned hellish, raspy and deep as he spoke. Max's eyes widened. He couldn't respond, frozen, petrified. I told you I'd end you, didn't I? I vow to make sure that happens. Not once, but 1,000,000 times, just like you've continued to harm me. You should be careful who you mess with. You never know someone well enough. Percy said again, voice deeper and more demonic than ever. Max tried to run, yell for help, but he couldn't. It wasn't the fear holding him in place anymore. With that, Max was thrown onto the bed, being forced to lay down again by some unseen force. He tried to move, but his body stayed pinned to the mattress, soul fighting for escape. He choked on the words that couldn't find a way to flee his mouth. Percy's silhouette ambled towards Max. This is for what you've done, just like I promised. Max was then obligated to watch helpless, as Percy, still hidden by the shadows of the room, flayed him open, dug into his open body and dug out his organs, one by one, and merely threw them behind him. The horrific scene didn't cease until the sun rose. Max lay on the bed, perfectly fine physically, but emotionally he was traumatized. The same incident repeated every night. Even if Max didn't sleep, or if he did, he would open his eyes to the same scene every night. It never stopped, no matter where he was. He told his parents, who forced him to meet a therapist, thinking that he was losing his sanity. Max thought he was too, before the pain started becoming more excruciating every night. As he watched wide-eyed at Percy clawing his organs out, he felt a burning sensation in the wound, which spread to the rest of his body. It burned like he was in hell. The visions never stopped, and soon caused Max to develop insomnia. He was forever trapped in torment for his sins, just like Percy promised.